Welcome to the A Cherry on Top YouTube channel. On today's video, I'll be showing you how to draw and then use watercolor paints to paint a pumpkin. I'm starting out by sketching the shape pumpkin that I want using a 4H graphite pencil. The 4H means that it is a very hard graphite pencil, and so the lines show up very lightly, which is perfect for watercoloring because I don't want these lines to show up in the final project. When I do need to erase something, I'm using a white mono eraser, which is perfect because it doesn't leave any residue or smear any color. Drawing a pumpkin like this is pretty forgiving, but if you still aren't much of a sketcher or drawer, I will have a drawing of this pumpkin on the Cherry blog that you can pull from and use. That way you can trace it and make it your own. I will have the link for the Cherry blog in the description below. Now that I have my pumpkin sketched on my page very lightly, I'm going to start with the watercolors. Today I'm using the Woodlands watercolor palette from Prima. I chose to use these colors because there are a lot of really good fall, deep, rich colors. I am working in a Dina Wackley white journal, which has really thick handmade watercolor paper, so it is beautiful to work on. The difference with watercolor paper and some other types of paper you might use to try to watercolor on is that on watercolor paper, the pigment of the paint and the water sits on top of the surface of the paper for a little bit, so it doesn't immediately soak in, so you have a little bit of work time. And this means if I add too much paint, I can blot it off with a paper towel easily, and it's just a lot more forgiving. In each of these sections of the pumpkin, I am concentrating most of the dark color, like the darker orange, to the sides, and then in the more raised area of the pumpkin, I'm putting a yellow. And as I'm going through, I am not doing the next section right next to the area that I just painted. That's because if I painted all of this in one go, it would all look like one blob because the colors would completely mix together. So I am making sure that the area next to where I'm working is completely dry before I start working right next to it. Watercolor is a paint that dries a lot lighter than what you see it when it's wet, so you might often need a lot more pigment or even more layers than what you think you do when it's wet. You'll see that in my drawings here in this pumpkin, that as I'm going it looks like it's really dark, but then when it dries it changes shades completely. If you would like to speed along the drying time, you can use a heat gun in between, something I like to do. And you can see how drastically lighter this pumpkin got after it was completely dry. And now that all of my sections that I painted first are dry, I can work on the areas right next to them. I am using the same technique of making the areas on the sides of each section a lot darker and then making it lighter in the center. This video today is part of our Technique Tuesday series, where each month we have a new focus on either a product or a technique, and for the month of October we are working on watercolors. So because it's October and we're working on watercolors, I thought that this would be a really fun painting that is beginner friendly. The only colors that I've used so far are yellow and a medium orange, but I will be adding other colors into this pumpkin as well, including some browns, a deeper red, and green. Making a watercolor painting often takes many layers, so all of these other colors will be added layer upon layer, but I wanted to have my base of just the yellow and orange as a good place to start. You can see here that my one layer wasn't completely dry underneath my layer that I'm working on now, so the colors really started to bleed. To fix this, I let it completely dry, and then you can go over it with more water, like just plain water on your paintbrush, and redefine those edges. Now I'm starting on my second layer. I am working with the same foundation that I've set for myself and pretty much using the same exact steps of keeping more of my darker colors on the outsides and lighter and yellow in the center. But this time I'm also adding a few other colors. I added a little bit of red on the edges, and then I'm also adding a little bit of green. For these darker colors, the red and the green, all I'm doing is tapping a tiny bit onto the wet of the orange area, and that's enough to spread it around a little bit. For the stem, I am using a dark brown, and I'll be mixing it in with a little bit of yellow to add a little color variation in it. And I have most of the edges are darker, like the dark brown, and then a little bit in the center has that yellow. Now that I have my stem done, it's time for a few finishing touches on my pumpkin. Any areas that I think seem too light, I will darken up a bit. I thought that there could be a little bit more pigment in this front area of the pumpkin, so I'm adding a little bit more orange to it, and then touch-ups throughout the pumpkin. Anything I don't like or thought had a weird line, I can easily fix at this stage.